The recent talks between the United States and Russia in Riyadh mark yet another chapter in the long and tumultuous history of these two global powers. From the Cold War to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, their relationship has been defined by a complex interplay of cooperation and competition. These talks, while ostensibly focused on ending the war in Ukraine, are inevitably shaped by decades of mistrust and strategic rivalry. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought hope for a new era of peace and cooperation. However, the expansion of NATO eastward and the West's intervention in the Balkans sowed the seeds of resentment in Moscow. The 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia and the subsequent conflict in eastern Ukraine further deepened the divide. The current negotiations take place against this backdrop of historical baggage. Both sides are acutely aware of the stakes involved, not just for Ukraine but for the future of the international order. The outcome of these talks will have far-reaching consequences, shaping the balance of power in Europe and beyond. For Ukraine, caught in the crossfire of this geopolitical struggle, the stakes couldn't be higher. The war has already exacted a devastating toll on the country, resulting in countless casualties and widespread destruction. While peace is undoubtedly the most urgent priority, it cannot come at the cost of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. A negotiated settlement that involves territorial concessions to Russia would be deeply unpopular within Ukraine. It would also set a dangerous precedent, emboldening other revisionist powers to pursue their territorial ambitions through military force. Ukraine's leadership is therefore right to insist on a just and lasting peace that respects its internationally recognized borders. However, Ukraine must also be realistic about its negotiating position. Russia, despite facing setbacks on the battlefield, still controls significant territory in the east. Moreover, Moscow has shown no willingness to back down from its core demands, including Ukraine's neutrality and recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. For both the United States and Russia, the negotiations represent an opportunity to advance their strategic interests. The United States, while providing significant military and financial support to Ukraine, is also wary of getting drawn into a wider conflict with Russia. Washington is therefore seeking a negotiated settlement that would allow it to refocus its attention on the Indo-Pacific region and the growing rivalry with China. Russia, on the other hand, is feeling the economic and political pressure of Western sanctions. The war has also exposed weaknesses in its military capabilities. Moscow is therefore looking for a way to extricate itself from the conflict without appearing weak or defeated. A negotiated settlement that recognizes its control over Crimea and provides security guarantees for the Donbas region would be seen as a victory for Putin. However, both sides face significant domestic constraints. In the United States, there is bipartisan support for Ukraine, and any perceived concessions to Russia would be met with fierce opposition. Similarly, in Russia, any sign of weakness from Putin could undermine his authority. A European puzzle. The perils of exclusion. The exclusion of European leaders from the initial rounds of talks has raised eyebrows and sparked concerns. Europe, particularly the countries bordering Ukraine, has the most at stake in this conflict. The influx of refugees, the energy crisis, and the threat of Russian aggression have all had a profound impact on the continent. This exclusion reflects a broader trend of European marginalization on the global stage. Despite its economic and political weight, Europe has often struggled to assert itself in international affairs. The Ukraine war has exposed the limitations of its soft power and the divisions within the bloc on key foreign policy issues. The absence of a unified European voice in these negotiations weakens the West's bargaining position. It also risks creating divisions within NATO, which Russia could exploit to its advantage. A durable and sustainable peace in Ukraine requires the active participation and support of all stakeholders, including Europe. The dragon in the room. Is China the real target? While the immediate focus of the talks is on ending the war in Ukraine, there's a growing sense that the real target might be China. The United States sees China as its primary strategic competitor and is concerned about its growing economic and military might. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent Western sanctions have pushed Moscow closer to Beijing. The two countries have deepened their economic and military ties, raising concerns in Washington about a potential alliance that could challenge U.S. global leadership. By engaging with Russia and potentially driving a wedge between Moscow and Beijing, the United States is hoping to weaken China's strategic position. A negotiated settlement in Ukraine that addresses some of Russia's security concerns could create an opening for a rapprochement between the West and Russia, thereby isolating China. A new world order shifting sands of global power. The outcome of the USA-Russia talks will have profound implications for the future of the international order. The war in Ukraine has already shattered the post-Cold War security architecture in Europe and accelerated the shift towards a multipolar world. The negotiations represent an opportunity to forge a new framework for peace and security in Europe. However, this will require both sides to demonstrate flexibility and a willingness to compromise. Failure to reach a negotiated settlement will only prolong the suffering in Ukraine and risk a wider conflict with potentially catastrophic consequences for all involved.